Hello, everybody. Welcome to Exit Planning 101, how to plan for the end game in opportunity zone investing. I am Catherine Baisley. I am a tax partner at Cherry Beckert. I am in our Atlanta office and part of our real estate industry, very heavily involved in opportunity zones. Some of you may have participated in the prior webinar that Andrew and I did, and we love this stuff. So just prepare yourself that we will go on tangents. We will talk about what comes to mind. We thoroughly encourage questions and audience participation. So please be sure to put any questions in the Q&A. And please meet Andrew Gradman. Andrew, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm happy to be back with Kat on another one of these presentations. I'm Law Office of Andrew L. Gradman, solo tax attorney in Los Angeles, and opportunity zones are one of my hobbies. That's all.
Okay, let's go ahead and this is not your typical webinar. I cannot emphasize that enough. This is the bulk of what you guys are going to be seeing. We don't have a formal slide deck. This is kind of an outline of what we're going to talk about. We may or may not go in this particular order. We like to take things a little bit more off the cuff, kind of see where conversation takes us. You will kind of get a sneak peek into our crazy brains, but hopefully this will be something that is of value to you and at least gets you thinking about some planning opportunities and ideas that you can implement sooner than later. So Andrew, let's kick off by talking a little bit about the OZ program. I'm guessing if people are planning for the exit, they have, the basic knowledge, but I think a little bit of overview is helpful.
Yeah, very little, because I'm sure many people do know it. But when we talk about the exit, we're talking about that, mostly we're talking about that 10-year basis step up. In the statute, you have to be aware that it's framed as the basis shall be made equal to the fair market value. And of course, as we'll say later, regulations have gone on further to say that they have a version of this in a pass-through, like a partnership, where the partnership sells its assets. They've rejiggered that for that situation to get you the assets sold without gain as well. At the end of the presentation, we'll talk about other exits, namely people who chicken out and want to leave before December of 2026, and how those people will be treated. I really don't feel compelled to say more about the program. I don't think people joining this presentation need an intro, right?
Yeah. I completely agree. So kind of let's get into the nitty gritty. Creative use of depreciation recapture is, in my opinion, one of the biggest advantages to the OZ program that is often overlooked or not discussed enough. People talk about depreciation, but I don't think they realize the benefit in the OZ world of how you can creatively use depreciation recapture, because most people just think of depreciation recapture as, yeah, I've taken depreciation. When I go to sell, I have to recapture it. It's taxed at a different rate. So I know this is a passion of yours, is the depreciation recapture idea and being creative about it. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah. One angle on it, which is less exity than the others, is just to say, given that this feature exists, how do people exploit it as best as they can? And I think it's nice to know that without thinking about it, people tend to be doing it right. Because what you want to do, as I have a way of phrasing this, is if a person could have their debts forgiven at will, they would exercise this power when their debts are at their maximum. Similarly, if opportunity funds forgive recapture gain, then investors should invest in enterprises whose assets recover basis quickly, yet retain their value. And then they should sell the investment when the spread between value and basis is at its maximum. And this came from an article I wrote in 2019 in Tax Notes on recapture, and I started to appreciate, it's been so long since we had the leveraged tax shelter boom of the 80s that I think people forgot how innovative it was to find a good shelter that had all the features I just described. I always wondered why you would say, people were investing in badgers back then. And I was like, well, why badgers? Because badgers retain their value, I guess. So in this case, as is in the handout, so first of all, real estate happens to be a great asset. And Kat pointed out that I used the word tax shelter in here, and I use that word not maliciously. I just mean it, neutrally. So I want to make sure there's
Yeah,
no
think of tax
implications.
shelters, tax mitigation is all we mean
That
in this scenario.
should have
There's
said
just
that. Yeah.
ways to reduce your taxes within all of the legal bounds and IRS regs that exist.
So real estate holds its value. Rental real estate, excuse me, residential real estate depreciates faster than commercial. Hey, great, you're already doing that. Obtain a cost seg study. I think we OZ professionals have been on the bandwagon of advocating for cost segs in OZ settings more than otherwise, because just to be clear, when you go to sell, you want to have recovered, extracted all the basis. Because you get two bites at the apple. You get to enjoy the deductions, and then you don't have to pay recapture on it. And then I
And
think
real quick, building on that, because I think so a question that I get from some of my clients is, well, people aren't taking the loss right now. So what's the point in paying for, a cost seg study? It'll kind of all work itself out at the end. But I would disagree with that. I think it's very rare that a cost segregation study is not to your advantage. And what people need to think about is, even if you can't use that accelerated depreciation now, when you sell and when you dispose of that asset, even if you have these losses that are built up, those losses are freed up and they offset ordinary income. So you may have a capital gain. Your capital gain may be a little bit greater, but you're going to have these big ordinary losses that have built up, and that rate differential is highly beneficial.
that's great. Yeah, and when I started thinking in these terms, in the olden days, I would look at cost seg studies and I would think that they were a bit promotional, and the benefits on the front page maybe weren't the benefits that you'd always realize. And it got to the point where I was trying to go to like cost seg conferences and say, look, you need to be selling yourself for the opportunity zone angle, because I think the value you add even the cost seg professionals don't know how important they are
Yep.
for opportunity zones. And so anyway, we agree on that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then so this last bit that we talk about, and I have it under the heading use all accelerated techniques. And I think this takes us to the home run part, where it's like, let's go to year 9, or in some cases year 8, and just think about this idea that, like, just before you sell, let's just simulate a scenario in which bonus depreciation is reintroduced legislatively. It's going to have phased out by then, but I am a believer that Congress is addicted to bonus depreciation and will never be able to not have it.
I agree with you.
So on that assumption, so you get to take something immediately. So let's say in year 9, you're thinking of getting ready to sell, and you say, you know what? Let's go redo all of the Section 1245 property that we have within this building. Let's do it, spruce it up. And in fact, maybe you have a buyer in the wings, and you go to the buyer and you say, tell me what you would like to do, and during the escrow period, we'll do it for you. You got to maybe be careful, substance over form. You don't want to, I don't know, keep that stuff in mind. You don't
But
want to
that
have
also entices the buyer to hang on, because maybe you entered into your escrow period with them, or your maybe even before escrow, your talks with them, and you don't want to lose the sale, but you also don't want to, you're that close to 10 years. So you want to just kind of keep them hanging on to get to without the games of, we found this little thing or that little thing. But that would be a good way to entice them to say, you know what, we'll take care of this, basically, TI or leasehold improvement or whatever 1245 property updates you have. Just give us some time to make those improvements and get it, get to the 10-year mark. And then I'll go on with the strategy.
Well, so now, given that bonus depreciation doesn't actually exist, let's talk about the actual things you can do. So let's look at Section 179, which was not a sunsetted out. It was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act gave us $1 million of window there that phases out after $2.5 million, and then it's available for what's called Section 179 property, believe it or not. That is generally Section 1245 property, it's personal property, but it includes a thing called qualified real property, which includes qualified investment property under Section 168, as well as roofs, HVACs, alarm systems, and fire systems. And so there's some real property that's in there. Qualified investment property is the interior of the building, no elevators or escalators, and it can't expand the size of the building. But all I'm trying to say is there's some real property in there. And so you could immediately expense, $1 million. So you're going to say, what's $1 million? And it saves us out of 2.5 million. I admit that's a real constraint. And all of the stuff that's real property only works for non-residential property, by the way. So there are some real handcuffs that come with it. But the scenario that you would have is if you, just like we said, so, and we should talk about debt. I know it's the next bullet point. We told them we wouldn't honor our bullet points.
But also just kind of
All
to
right.
kind of set the stage a little bit, we're talking about 179 which is the more restrictive, but under this scenario that Andrew just tossed out, we both believe bonus will come back in some form or fashion. Maybe it's not back to 100% bonus. Maybe it's 60%. But so let's say rather than $1 million under 179, you've put in 5 million of 15-year, 7-year, 5-year, whatever, qualifying property, and you can take 60% of that. Well, it's $3 million, and that can make a big difference. And then especially if you tax affect it, let's say 37% versus the 27% or versus the 20% capital gain rate, which we're at right now, they're using rates as of today, you're getting a 17% spread on that rate differential. So, I mean, these can have a real impact.
Yeah. It's that's why I choose the word tax shelter, but I'm going to be the only one on the slide using that phrase.
And I know there's at least 2 people that were planning on attending this that know why I cringed at that. So, yep, I bet one of them. Yep, see the laughing faces.
Oh, now let's weave into debt because
Yes.
because again, I do think that the analogies to those of us who are old enough or who read about the 80s remember this. So because now you take on debt and you use that to finance these expenses. Because initially my intuition was, okay, basis is stepped up to fair market value. You take on debt, that's going to be a double-edged sword because you're reducing the value of the enterprise by the debt, so you've accomplished nothing. Well, I wrote that in 2019 before they came out with the final regs. And then they came out with the final regs and they clarified that they don't want that result. They want to give you the credit for the bricks on the ground, of the value of the bricks, because they want to value that's how you're serving the community. And so once they ascertain your fair market value is like your equity value, you add back in the debt to give you the boost. So in other words, so let's talk about strategies which would involve within the last 2 years taking on debt to finance these expenditures. What you should know is that you only get credit for something that's called qualified financing. I forget the vocabulary, it's in the slide.
Qualified non-recourse financing.
Well, that's the 465 term. I think 707 and this reg don't say that, but it's some qualified. Everything's qualified. I don't know. So, but it's the vocabulary from disguised sales.
Oh,
So
yes.
707 dash something reg.
Yes.
And so if you go through the list, and it's in our handout, to get debt that's good for that, one way to do it is to have it be 2-year-old debt. If the debt's 2 years old, they'll never question the validity of it. So then we would say, okay, that in year 7.5, go off and buy a new roof. But here's some more ideas. If the debt is used to buy a capital improvement on the structure, they will not question that it's qualified debt. So if you're going to buy a new roof, you could buy it at year 9.75, and no one's going to, and that's still going to be good debt. That's not going to, take away from your FMV. So I thought that was pretty generous of Treasury there. So all of which is to say, like on the eve of selling to your buyer, as we've said and we've emphasized, you go to your buyer and you say, tell us what improvements you want, because if we do it ourselves, we get the depreciation immediately and we don't have to pay recapture on it. And
maybe don't say that part to them right away, because then they're going to be like, well, then reduce the price. We're making this work for you. But maybe if it's phrased, we need to make sure we appreciate you waiting till we get to the 10-year mark. We don't need to give everything away.
Good point. Yeah, negotiation is not my skill.
So, and another thing that where why the debt is so important to be used for these qualifying improvements is Andrew mentioned disguised sale. And if the debt comes into the entity and then the cash goes out to the members, it could be considered a disguised sale, which is the sale of your interest, which could blow your 10-year hold. So that is why you need to be careful if you're within that 2-year window of your exit, that you use the debt wisely. Because I know a lot of the OZ sponsors and some of the deals early on were saying, we're going to take out this debt, we're going to get your capital investment refunded to you within X amount of time. And there are some constraints around that. So just take anything about getting your equity back via debt with a grain of salt and make sure you get some good advice
Let me
before
ask
doing.
you about this because it sounds like you've thought about this in a way I haven't. So I know that I'm thinking when I hear about debt and repayments, I'm thinking about 2026 paying down the taxes. And I always okay, you know what? I know what you're talking about because we always tell our clients that this is how they're going to pay their tax bill on April 15th, 2027. But I have been dreading April 15th, 2025, which is 2 years before April 15th, 2027, when the debt that people take on is going to be within that 2-year window. And this is what you're saying, is that we're approaching that point where it's not a problem now if the debt's taken on now, but if it's taken on, tell me how you process this as we get
Well,
closer to
just in
December
general,
31st,
I think a
2026.
lot of people aren't aware of the disguise sale rules. And so they just, a lot of time, not even just disguise sale rules, I think they aren't aware of some of the constraints around taking debt on and then using the proceeds of that debt to reimburse or to get cash to their investors via distributions. I think often they're not thinking of the interest tracing rules, which could limit the deductibility of the interest on those notes. And then if there's some kind of change in equity and the cash comes in via debt in 2 years, with a JV partner and then goes back out to someone, that could be treated as a disguised sale. So there's
I
taking
hear
on
you.
debt isn't quite as simple as some people often think from a tax perspective. And so often we hear about things after the fact that we just don't want to make sure. We want to make sure that people aren't thinking, oh, well, I heard this in a webinar, I'm going to take this debt on. This is something that we can do. There's just a lot of nuances around taking on debt that
So
for
I want to,
example, like in these
yeah.
OZ, for a lot of these OZ deals, a lot of what we heard early on was, we're going to put debt on this property. As we build it, we'll get you your cash back. Sounds great in theory, but oftentimes that debt in the early phase, during the development phase, is guaranteed by the developer. So it isn't actually guaranteed by the property yet. So there isn't any debt to allocate to the investors. So if they were to get a distribution, that would be a distribution in excess of basis because they haven't had any debt allocated to them. I know this is getting super, super techie. But it's something that people hadn't considered when they were doing their modeling. So I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that there are a lot of nuances around debt and debt finance distributions and the timing that people can be aware of. Just
This,
call us if you're going to have questions.
I actually, if it's all right, I want to spend a little longer on this actually. Also to maybe correct something I said, I know that people listening closely, some of you are freaking out maybe based on something I said, so I want to unfreak you out. So be alert that there are two different rules here that often go into the same label. There's the disguise sale rules, 707 rules, which are on the principle of you don't want to, the tax law doesn't want you to use partnerships as conduits for moving because you have non-recognition on the way in, non-recognition on the way out. And someone clever person said, well, why don't I just never take taxes ever by using a partnership as a conduit? That's why we have the disguise sale rules. They catch you
Yep.
on that. Then in the opportunity zone context, there's a rule relating to inclusion events, which incorporates some of the vocabulary from the disguise sale rules, but it's not a disguise sale. And it says that if you invest into a fund and then you start getting your tax benefits, they don't want to see you take money out until you've held on, until you've been in there for 2 years. That's not a disguised sale, but we often speak of it that way just because it incorporates the rules. And that's where I have to correct something I said because it's simply, I was talking about what's the significance of April 15th, 2025. That's the date on which if you invest in the fund after that date, then there's fewer than 2 years between then and April 15th, 2027. And so under that 2-year rule that's incorporated from the Sky Sale land, those people are going to get hit if they take money out of the fund to pay their taxes.
Mhm.
And that's less scary maybe than the thing I almost said 5 minutes ago.
Now, if you haven't, if you invest and the business is generating income and you're being allocated income and you get some cash, that's okay. I don't want people to think if any cash is bad, but just think in terms of debt. Just be wary. I think is kind of some of it is way too technical to get into on this webinar. I mean, we could probably do a whole webinar just on debt,
Yes.
But just be wary. That's my giant disclaimer for all of this.
Let's see what we got on our. You want to talk a bit about the distinction between people who choose to stay until year 10 and then run away versus people who want to stay out longer? That was a bullet point.
Yeah, we can. Which I think is going to be very interesting because I think there's some people that are just counting down until we get to year 10. They want to get their step up in basis and sell. But then there's going to be some people, and I think this might kind of weave in a couple different things. So we may be all over the place with this one. I have a feeling. There's some people that are like, well, wait a minute. I don't care that it's year 10. I can stick around, depending on the person's age. I can stick around for 20 more years. I can stick around till, was it 2048? You know, I think some people will be thinking of it in terms of, no, I did this for a long-term play. I'm going to stay in until, I'm forced to exit at 2048 because I have an asset that is growing and I won't pay tax because the step up is not at year 10, the step up in basis, the step up is at exit. So I think that will be interesting because I think there will be some people potentially in the same fund with different goals and intentions.
Yeah, so this is going to straddle two of our bullets because that's the staggered exit. Let me speak to this year 10 thing. I have a friend who's very smart who talks about the idea, why would you leave before 2048? And I love the way he has this sort of smug quality to anything he says because he's that smart. But this is one of these occasions where I wish I could have thrown it back in his face because let's go to the year 20.
Hi, friend, if you're online right now.
Yeah, friend no more.
Oh.
Yeah, after what I just said. 2018. Let's go to 2018. 2048 is the year that the program's going to end, and so that you can no longer sell for the basis step up. That's 30 years later.
Yep.
Let's imagine you're the kind of person who's wealthy enough and smart enough to invest in a fund. You're 55. And you're thinking, oh, great, I can stick this around for 30 years, and then when I'm 85, I'll sell, and it'll be a no tax situation. But I think if you look at the actuarial tables for a 55-year-old, I think you're probably dead by the time you're 85.
Or maybe getting close.
Depends
if you're a man or a woman.
I think you're dead. Likely, probably. And so I say this because you already get a basis step up. Well, for having bought a ticket on this earth. And so I think it's interesting to think like, so I actually, as you look at most people who are wealthy and therefore old, you have to get to the point where it's like, dudes, first of all, if someone walks in my door and they're 80 and they want to do an opportunity fund, I absolutely say to them, I don't know if you do. Polling. We got good news and bad news, Ren. We have polling questions. We don't have CPE.
Correct. There's no CPE. We do have 2 polling questions that we just need to remember to kind of throw in. Here we go. Okay. And this is just a kind of, the intention is, for us to look at these and depending on where we go with our mad minds, maybe tailor some of, what we're talking about. So where do you stand with your OZ investment? Are you in it for the long haul? Are you considering an early exit, planning the exit at the 10-year mark, or why 10 years? So it's actually perfectly timed for what we're talking about.
Yeah. So at year 10, maybe when my client is 70, I might just say to him, look, exit, get the basis step up, and then diversify. Get into some other asset that maybe is going to you got all the value growth, the whatever graph one uses, the logarithmic graph of growth. That's not the correct graph. That you're going to get out of this. Go get something else that's going to grow faster. I think is the argument I'd make to my clients. All right.
And I think it's also important to think about, because I hope people didn't kind of skim past what you were saying, that you already get a step up. Remember, they're for an OZ investor, there are two possible step ups. You have the step up that every single person gets at death, your step up in basis of whatever assets you're holding. And then for OZ investors, you get an OZ step. You get your step up at year 10 or on disposal. So that's what Andrew's talking about when he was talking about, that we all have the built-in step up basis. I want to make sure that didn't get lost somewhere.
Yeah. So that was, and then under this heading in the handout, we have another factor before which is going to transition into this sort of staggered exit concept.
And what we've mentioned the handout a couple times. We will make the handout available for you guys. It is quite verbose, so we didn't want to put it into a slide deck because it would get lost in everything that we're saying. We will have that, don't worry. But we just didn't want to put it on the screen because it would be so many words you wouldn't have any idea what we were even talking about. And we bounce around so much, we'd get you all nauseous trying to figure out.
The real reason is because I used the word tax shelter once, and so we can't send it to you until we remove that.
We may need to edit for that.
Yeah, then you'll get it. So what the handout you don't have but will have gives one of the reasons for whether to sell at 10 years or not 2048 as the moral hazard, the preferences of the manager, who as an individual does not typically get OZ benefits. So Kat, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, so in a lot of these, in a lot of the OZ projects that we have seen are real estate projects, or the real estate oriented businesses, that kind of thing. But typically the manager is someone that doesn't necessarily have a cash investment, a true OZ investment in the deal. They are someone that's put the deal together. If it's a development deal, they're often going to get partnered. They're partnering with the developer themselves, and they aren't getting paid until the exit. Typically, they might get some kind of management fee, but in a typical real estate deal, the developer is really waiting until that capital event, working its way through the waterfall, and that's when they're getting kind of the bang for their buck. So they're going to be ready to sell. Some of them you may have already seen have gotten great opportunities, and they're like, we're selling before year 10. We've done the math. We think this is a better answer. I think there will be a lot of analysis around that around year 10, because I think the managers, they've put in their time. They're ready to get paid, and they need to find a way to do that. So I think, to the extent that if everybody's in agreement, that's easy. If all the investors are ready to exit, managers ready to exit, they find the right deal, fantastic. But kind of going into the staggered sales, what happens? I think there's two different things that could come out of this. What happens if you have some investors that came in 2018, and then another round of investors came in 2020, all in the same fund, all in the same project? So it's not, two different buildings that you could split up and sell and do special allocations. Well, so now it's 2028. So your first round of investors have hit year 10. Second round of investors are only at year 8. So I think you have one scenario there that I think we should talk about. And then I think there might be a time, let's say your group of investors they're ready to stay in the deal. It doesn't matter that it's year 10. They like this project. They want to keep going, but the manager really wants to get out. So what do you do in that scenario? And what are some ideas? I think those are two things that are worth exploring.
I agree. The theme between them is that one solution is for the party that wants to stay to go to the party that wants to leave and arrange a transaction. If the seller is in an opportunity fund investing position, tax qualified position, to buy their equity, I think it's engineering it other ways is harder. So in the case where you have like the staggered 10-year person, 8-year person, Mr. 8 years as an investor goes to Mr. 10 years and says, here, give me your equity. And so 10 years, Mr. 10 years goes out, gets his basis step up. Mr. 8 Years doesn't hold a qualifying investment because this is after 2026. There are no new qualifying
For the
investments
new piece, for the acquired
for
piece.
that slice.
Yep.
Yeah. There's no
Yep.
tax benefit to what he's doing. He's just getting rid
Correct.
of a time bomb. That's all.
Yes.
And then goes on and waits 2 more years. And one would hope that the deal that's struck at that point is one that is like favorable to both parties, but it's not a market sale. You know,
Right.
you didn't go out and put it on the market and see what the market will bear.
Yep.
And
That'll be tricky.
Yeah.
That'll be a lot of negotiation.
Yeah. So 2 years later, one of those two parties is going to feel screwed.
Yes.
But that's how life works.
Mm-hmm.
And then similarly, if the manager, so we were describing a scenario then at year 10, and the manager says, all right, guys, I've done my job. We're going to sell the property. And then all of the investors may say, no. We think property values are going to go up a bit in the next 5 years, and we want to be benefiting from the tax benefits of the tax-free sale after that. And the manager says, well, too bad you didn't put anything in the operating agreement that prevents me from selling now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a miracle that so many of these ventures will go to year 10 at all because the operating agreement doesn't contain that either.
Yep.
And it's just sort of like polite convention that
Yeah.
even
It's
gets
just,
us to
oh,
that
well,
point.
that was a given. It's an opportunity zone. Of course we would go to year 10.
As
No?
they say, and they say with their fingers crossed.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so we were talking about this in the preparation, and I think our expectation is that if that conflict develops, then all of the investors would get together and like buy out, redeem
Yes. We
that
would be a
manager.
redemption.
And so our takeaway was that like while we all expect year 10 to be a year full of sales of properties, it's also going to be a year full of creative financing solutions
Yes.
for these people who don't want to
I think
sell.
it's going to be a year of creative financing and a ton of analysis, like crazy analysis on does it make sense to say, hey, these people want to leave? What does that look like? Let's paper this out. Like, what does it look like if these people stay? What's a fair price to buy them out at? How do we structure that? I think there's going to be a lot of creative financing, but creative planning. Because I think there are quite a few ways that it can be done. But I mean, we'll see. Who knows what will happen? But I think year 10 is going to be very, very interesting. And who knows what the market is going to be at that point? Maybe everything is down. So most people say no, but we want to sit and see, how real estate or the market rebounds. Who knows? Maybe we're doing all this planning for no reason. But I think it matters. At some point, it will matter.
So want to jump into the bullet 6 and I can leave that one off?
Yes. Yes. Why don't you kick us off on that one?
Yeah. Let me start with this. For those of you who don't remember or know, there's a special place for master leases and opportunity funds because in those cases where someone comes into the fund and the property is tainted, say because it was purchased from a related party, or maybe it was acquired before 2018, for example, then it's hard to cure that. One way you cure that is just by just saying, okay, fine, we'll accept that the property is bad property and we'll try and get above that. 70% of property is good and 30% is bad. We'll try and squeeze it within that 30% window and see if we can bury it under improvements. But there's another way, and that is to have the entity that holds the real property not be either the fund or the QOZB, but rather to set up another fund next to it and have that, or when I say another fund, have the fund be next to it, and then have the landlord enter into a master lease. And it's interesting because under the final regs, Treasury just is very tolerant and sort of liberal in terms of what rules you don't have to follow if you're an opportunity fund or QOZ business that is leasing property. One of which is you don't have to substantially improve the property, although functionally speaking, you still have to really work hard because you have to abide by the 5% non-qualified financial property rule. So you got to get cash off your books, and you're probably going to spend it on improvements anyway. So it's not, practically speaking, a huge difference. And then another thing is that it's okay if there's related party issues. So that QO fund or QOZB, which enters into the lease, can be related to the landlord. And the landlord, of course, is related to the person who sold the property to the landlord. And yet, no problem. And so that's where we set up these structures where there's a QOZB, which takes its cash and takes a master lease from a landlord. The other requirements are that you cannot prepay more than 12 months of rent. For those of you who come from a New Markets tax credits world, this is a version of a similar rule which they had there. They basically don't want the way I like to say it is the government, when the government's doing projects for low-income people, they want projects to be shovel-ready. And they want by shovel-ready, they mean they want benefits to happen to people right away. And they don't like the idea that the benefit is something like prepaying a future benefit on a lease. It's a weird form of accounting where if you buy a building and you own it for 30, 50 years, that's fine. But if you prepay a lease on that, they view it differently. And that's just the world we live in. But anyway, and then also the regs say that the rent that's going to be paid has to be market. And they actually say market as defined under a Section 4082 analysis. And the conservative people in the space think, arguably, that means you have to actually go to a special accounting firm that does Section 482 transfer pricing analyses on the rent. I don't know if I agree, but that's the view. So this was all just background. And so that's why we set up these master leases in the setting. But I think in the context of this presentation on exit planning, I think people don't realize how really constrained they're going to be and how limiting and maybe disappointed they have to be when you get to the exit. The thing I have in mind is just one of the most common mindsets of a person who seeks tax planning is that they don't understand transfer pricing, and they think that the way you get tax benefits is by abusing transfer pricing. So in this case, they think, okay, the opportunity fund has the master lease, and the landlord company does not, and it's not an opportunity fund, and it's the landlord. And we'll just make sure that when the sale happens, all of the sales proceeds go to the opportunity fund, and all the gain goes there, and it's all tax-free. And that's why I say, okay, these people are very smart in one way, is one way of putting it, but they don't know about transfer pricing, because that is obviously not what the asset owned by the opportunity fund is worth. Let's say it's a lease in which they're paying the landlord $10 and receiving from the tenant 20. And it's a 30, in California, we would have a 34-year lease because 35 is often bad for property tax purposes. You just take that and do an annuity calculation, 10-year difference for $10 for 34 years. That the opportunity fund can't be worth more than that. I mean, you're doing time value of money calculations. Sure, that's a real headache. There's real math to be done, but you can't justify more than that. I tell people then, okay, how do you do better? You get the lease to be as long as possible. If you can get past 34, if you can make it 99 years, then great, you've captured more value in the fund. If you can cause the fund to be responsible for the lion's share or all of the improvements, then you can justify, from a valuation perspective, really minimizing the value of the rent on the master lease. That's another way that you juice up the opportunity fund's value. But having said all this, I just want, I see leases, and I don't think the leases need to say everything I just said, but they certainly, if they don't say it, then you need to whisper in the ear of the parties, like, look, you can't not do these things in the future. Go ahead. I've said a lot of stuff.
No. I think that's good. And I would also venture to say that, at least in some of the deals that I have worked on, where it isn't necessarily a master lease, but there's a management services agreement between, a property and an operating company that maybe hypothetically, of course, is, running a hotel and is responsible for all of the furniture and fixtures of the hotel. And that entity is the business. So although, yes, we would love to have that's the OZ business. We would love to have all of the value there, but of course there's value in the structure itself. So, you will need to justify the allocation between the structure and the lease or the management company, whatever it may be. I think people don't need to get greedy, just, right off the bat and say all of the benefits are in whatever the OZ property is. You have to be realistic, and I
That's
would,
funny. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
definitely seek professional advice on that one, or
I
have
just had this
something
conversation with the client. Go ahead. Sorry, you go ahead. Sorry.
CYA. But I would just CYA, because I think that will get questioned.
Talking
Is
with a
that
client
what
about
you
this
advised?
yesterday, where, well, so I think in the early years of a fund, like on day one, when you're doing substantial improvement, everyone wants to say, my brother Joe will paint the walls for $5 million. And then so and so it's like, look, I've doubled the basis. And then you get the money in, you get the money out, and then your fund is now a sham. And so then the temptation gets just as you say, it just gets the opposite as you get closer to the end, where it's like you actually want, if now that you're thinking about that basis step up, you want to contrive the opposite. And when I say you want to, I'm not saying I'm going to help you do this. I'm saying like you think you want that, but
Mm-hmm.
but if you're working with a good professional in this space, we're really not going to help you do that. We're going to help you make sure that the numbers conform to arm's length standards. Because the IRS, I don't, in my opinion, you may question me, I don't think they're stupid. I think that they know to look for this kind of thing. People trying to, it's comparable to bailing out E&P from a corporation. It's just
Mm-hmm.
another form of the same game that we've been playing with the IRS for a century. Um, so yeah, that's the thing with the
I think they
master
will look at
leases.
anything where there are some of those kind of related parties. I think those will be viewed carefully, maybe not initially, but yeah, I agree. The IRS is not dumb. They will find, I mean, and remember, there's an OZ tracking number, and there is reporting that is required for these opportunity zones at the fund level. So it wouldn't surprise me if there is, as we approach year 10, there are some changes to the reporting that somehow incorporates where, any kind of related party, I don't know how they will define it, but any kind of related party interactions. It, this is 100% speculation, but I don't think they're going to let it quietly go into the night. People get their step up and kumbaya, everybody's great.
Well, that's really interesting. So just so I'm clear, are you imagining cases where you get to the 10th year and people are like, let's enter into a related party transaction, say, where my cousin, um, trying to think, trying to think, if the cousin buys your opportunity fund for an unrealistic multiple, has anyone really made off with a gain? I mean, is that really a trick?
I'm not, I wasn't necessarily thinking about that, but more if you have like the property and the management company and, like something like that where you have two related entities. So not necessarily related party as in arm's length, but two related parties that are tied together in the OZ business somehow.
Okay.
And how the allocation of the value is going to be between, brother sister companies or something like that.
Oh, okay. I hear you there. You know what? Yes, and I think one way of commenting on that is like I have often said that like when I see management compensated with like a class of equity which is not qualified because they're providing sweat equity, I often think, man, that's a dead weight loss. That's like had that equity gone to the qualifying investors, the IRS on the whole would be getting less taxes because it would be getting the basis step up. And I wonder if there's a way to like contrive it so that you make it look like more of the equity and more of the basis step up goes to those investors, and then they write a check as service fee to the management to make them whole. I don't know if that's what you had in mind, but maybe it's the same family of what you had
Well,
in
I
mind.
just thought of something, it was one of those where my brain is going and I maybe wasn't actively listening like they teach you in all those classes. So my apologies. But you know, uh, one of the kind of I don't know, not necessarily popular, but something that has been done, if somebody is a business owner and they sell that, they gift ownership of the business to a trust, that trust sells the interest to another trust, takes back an installment note, and then they defer payment on the installment note, and in which case the sale of the asset, that sale is not recognized until the payment is made, but within the same transaction it's generated a large step up. um it is That is something that's done more for, business exit planning. That is something that has now become a listed transaction with the IRS. And
Yeah.
it's basically because you're generating this huge step up. Um, it's not phantom because there is a note that is out there and it is payable, but it is deferred for a very long time. That's something else that while we were talking, it wouldn't surprise me if the IRS does something that says, well, wait a minute, if this is going to be some kind of installment agreement, if the sale is over some kind of installment agreement where the gain isn't being recognized, or obviously our gain's not being recognized, but I don't know. I'm just,
It's very interesting. Let me say this. There were a few things I know better than opportunity zones, and that transaction is one of them. Of the comments that were submitted to the listing, I wrote one of the comments.
I did not know
Because
this. So I may have just walked right into dangerous territory here.
no, I'm not gonna. It's not that kind of thing. I get what you were saying. I've been in settings, professional settings, earlier in my life where I was promoting. I was forced to promote this transaction against my will, so I know it quite well.
Now you know
And
why
I
I
would
don't
just
like the word tax shelter.
I'll be careful, and I'll just say that. Look, I get why the flavor of arrangement would seem to be relevant here. I'm thinking because what the kind of problem you're trying to solve is this: you're 10, you do not have an arm's length buyer, or you have a relationship with your manager and you're trying to contrive some kind of an ideal arrangement. I just don't see installment sales as being the best way to do it because it's like those are for people who have a lot of gain and they don't want to
Hmm.
recognize it because if they do, it'll hurt.
Hmm.
Opportunity funds are situations where the seller at year 10 isn't in the most vulnerable situation. They actually have
Right.
a dodge around the game. So
But if
I'm sure
there's
you
any
meant it.
kind of
Yeah.
related party, that's where I'm thinking there might be, if there's something with that management company or brother sister companies, or I just,
And for the record, the reason that maybe I'll say how that fails so that we maybe could weave it back into opportunity funds. In my opinion, the best attack on that structure is to say that that notional middle party who likes to say that they're buying and then selling is really an agent for the taxpayer who's engaging in this transaction. And you don't get installment sale treatment when you're selling to someone who's your left hand, who is you in another guise. And
Mhm.
so I guess the thematically weaving this to opportunity funds, I would just say like substance over form is real.
Yes,
Okay. We
yes.
tax professionals take it very seriously. I know
That
that
is
again,
probably
it's
the
sort of like the
biggest
same
takeaway
thing.
from all of this.
It's sort of the same thing with 42 transfer pricing.
Hmm.
That and substance over form are things that maybe in your lay life, as you Google tax, you're like, oh, I got an idea. I got a new way to get around taxes. We're here to tell you it's not going to work
Yeah.
because
We like the creativity. Keep the ideas coming. We're just going to keep bashing them.
yeah, uh-huh.
Um, okay, let's take a second to do our second polling question. And again, this is just in case this gives us any ideas of what we might want to throw in, or if there's something that we need to follow up with you about. Um, and we can talk about why this might be relevant, before we sign off. Have you considered doing a valuation of your investment? Yes, it's already in the works. No, but would love to learn more. And I think we might have some questions in the chat while people are answering this. Let me see. Um,
Will
okay,
there be a
first
recording
one.
available? Go ahead.
If you exit early before year 10, can you invest in another OZ fund and avoid having to pay capital gains tax due to the early exit? Do you want to take that? Or you want me to take that? I don't
Okay,
know if you
let's
can
see
even
how I
see
would do
this.
this. Yeah, no, I just figured it out. So it's really going to depend on when we say exit in this context. Some people are thinking, generally the opportunity fund owns the QOZ business, the operating business, and as long as you treat the opportunity fund as a hermetically sealed case from which the funds never leave. So you say your QOZB sells its building, it pays tax on it because these are not exempt organizations. You get your
Hmm.
K1 on that sale. Um, and then the money goes up to the opportunity fund. It can sit there for a year and marinate there while you're looking for your next venture, and then you redeploy it. You've paid tax on the gain, which is lousy because the whole point of this opportunity was to pay tax on none of the gain. But at least you can redeploy into a new development and build it, build it up anew, and you don't have an inclusion event. So the other two scenarios, one is if you never sell, but you do a 1031 exchange. If your QOZB does a 1031 exchange, then there's no K1 gain at all. You buy new property in the 1031. Just keeping in mind now either you buy one of these certificate of occupancy gimmicks, in which case you're golden. That's really the king of solutions here. But how are you going to do that in the 180-day replacement period? I don't know. Or you actually buy something you've got to substantially improve again. You got to come up with the money for that. So that just the fundraising for that, what are you going to do? Get new equity? That's going to be non-qualifying equity. You're going to raise debt? That could be boot. So just think about the 1031 scenario in opportunity funds is not painless. And then the worst possible scenario is where you sell the stuff in the opportunity zone business, distribute the cash up to the shareholders. Well, now that's the outcome you're trying to avoid. Then there's gain. So that's my answer.
And can you please discuss exit prior to year 10, which I think we have some. I guess I don't know specifically what the question is. If is the fund selling the property? In it, like, because there's a couple different things that this could relate to. Like the fund could sell the property, like we've discussed. The fund could redeploy. An investor could sell their particular interest. You can, if you have capital gains that come up to you that would otherwise be an inclusion event, you would no longer reach it to year 10, make it to year 10. You can redeploy now into another qualifying investment, but you are starting a new 10-year holding period. So I'm not sure where this individual partner needs liquidity.
So like, let's say like this one dude needs liquidity. So that individual then won't be able to do the thing you just described because he gets his cash check. He's not going to roll it over. Mm-hmm. It's pretty simple, sadly. First he gets his K1 gain from the sale of the whatever is, everyone gets their K1 share, even the people who are not him. So they're going to hate him. And then he gets his cash check, which will accelerate the gain that would otherwise be a 12/31/2026 gain. Mm-hmm. And if that may make him ineligible for the 5-year basis step up and the 10-year basis, 7-year mm-hmm. basis step up. And it's as simple as that.
Well, but that's if the fund is selling. But if an individual, one of the individual members of a fund needs to exit prematurely, I think that's when you approach the manager. There will, at least on the operating agreements that I've seen, the ability to sell your particular interest is extraordinarily limited. And I think it would be severely discounted, due to lack of marketability, due to lack of control. So, but I think you would need to kind of start with the manager and the other members to see if they would have an interest in buying that interest. Keeping in mind, it's a separate holding for them. But then if you were to have, if you wanted to sell that interest to me, that could also cause some issues, because even if I wanted to buy it, let's say the other folks have been invested for 7 years and I make an investment now, we're going to have the staggered holding periods that could cause a lot of issues when it comes to the sale point. Yeah. I don't know if I'm not entirely sure if we're covering that, but I think those are the two different scenarios that. Okay, good.
Oh, wow, you guessed it. I mean, we do happen to have stuff in our 8th bullet, which is also further elaborates on early exits for the people who are. Some people are dreading tax raises under hypothetical future administration. And whatnot, and they're saying, like, how can I lock in? Like, they don't want to have the gain on 12/31/2026. They want to have it now. And then I just have to say to those people, well, just so you know, you can't have it both ways. If the only way to do that is by exiting. Mm-hmm. So that's an important thing to know. You can't just electively accelerate the gain till now and continue to be invested in a qualifying investment.
So do we want to cover a few of our points in bullet 8? I think state tax considerations, I think the most important thing is the states are a wild, wild west. So you can't just assume whatever's happening at the federal level will be respected at the states. I mean, that's just probably the quickest way to say it. There'll be some additional information in the handout. But I think there's some valuable information in this premature exits if we want to talk about some of that. And there's
Yeah.
different types, like, go ahead, kick it off, because I think we
Well,
only
let
have like
me,
5 minutes.
yeah, this will sound just as eclectic as everything else, but in the handout you'll see that there's there's a concept called voluntary decertification of a fund. And it's funny that the regs were not really issued to explain how to do that. I had the opportunity to call someone chief counsel, and they told me how you do it. And I'm kind of weirded out that this would be conveyed over a phone call. But I took what they told me and I put it in the handout that you will get later. And it basically says that you file a standalone form 8996 for what will be the final day, and you fill it out as though that was your last day. So you do a 90% calculation on your good and bad assets, and they give me the address, and it all sounds very well and good. And then I discovered something weird about it, is that, like, because they told me how to do this in March of 2022 or 2023, and then the client for whom I was doing this it took a while. I actually think that person's on the call. So hi, it's nice to see you. So for, took a while. And then in and then what I reflected on later is that we so we nevertheless submitted it, like, say, in September, and we said terminating as of March, and we didn't get any pushback. And I don't know if we didn't get any pushback
Oh, good.
because it went to the wrong post office box, or if we didn't get any pushback because they just accepted it. But I think that just be aware, like, I think we got away with it, but don't. The IRS hates that kind of thing. The IRS hates it when, like, you do anything retroactively, because they don't like the idea that, like, taxation is not quantum physics. Things don't exist in superpositions, and then you decide whether the cat's alive or dead when you file your return. It's actually a pretty good analogy. You have to, because there will be cases where it's like, for another taxpayer, that taxpayer is like, well, let me see if I can turn things around. Let me give another 8 months, and at the end of the 8 months, if it really doesn't work, then we'll retroactively terminate 8 months ago. The
Mm-hmm.
IRS really needs to clear this up, because otherwise they'll let people get away with it up to a point, and then after a certain point they won't. And I think, as the tax reporting public, I think it would be nice to have clarity on this. So that's the thing I wanted to share with you.
Um, okay, one thing that I want to make sure we talk about is in 2026, we'll be super quick because we have 2 minutes. In 2026, when your taxes due, remember, you incurred a gain in 2018, you deferred it in 2018 by making a qualifying investment, but that tax is due in 2026. Now the question is, well, what tax is due? Is it due on your original gain? Or are you able to get a valuation of your partnership interest and figure out what your gain is in 2026, and taxes due on that revalued amount, on the lesser of the original gain or that revalued amount? That is something that I don't think that we have talked about very much in the industry in general. And I think that is something that could be used. If I were a fund manager, that is something that I would propose doing to my investor pool, to say, look, we have an opportunity to value this. The value may come in looking kind of low, but that's actually to your advantage at this point in time. Now, that could also bite you in the butt if you're trying to get financing at the same time. But I think there could be a very creative and investor friendly move that could be made by getting such a valuation done. A lot of the projects that I've seen are behind in their construction, they're behind in their lease up, they're not where they anticipated being in 2026. I mean, we all know that COVID kind of threw everybody. Rising interest rates have really slowed down a lot of what I have seen. And I think that will devalue the property, at least in the short term. So is it worth getting a valuation and looking at this and saying, oh, okay, maybe instead of a $200,000 gain, my interest is only worth 100,000, so I'm paying tax on 100,000. I would be interested in that if I were the investor.
It's a very interesting topic, and I'm sure there's a slice of people who thought we would discuss this sooner in the presentation.
Sorry, we
I will
warned you
admit,
guys.
look, I'm going to admit I know about this in the abstract, but I don't have insight into how one would score the big wins on this, because it's just intuitively I'm thinking, my goodness, you bought this stuff, you got licenses and stuff, and then you built on it, how could it have gone down in value? And that reflects, I say intuitively, that's not a professional statement. Like people have said to me, you idiot, that's not how this works. And so I think it would be, I think it reflects the art of the appraisal industry to be able
Well,
to find
and
ways
it's,
to
or if you have a business, like I actually have this with one of my clients that we've been talking about is, because they have a business that is, it's a manufacturing business and it is not going well at all. So I was like, okay, well, I mean, bankruptcy, not well. If you are still in operation in 2026 and things are not going well, this is something we need to do because the value is not there. I don't think they'll be around that long, but that is something that, we have considered. Okay, we need to wrap up. I am so sorry. You guys are seeing flashed on your screen. We have some upcoming webinars, year-end tax planning strategies. These are post-election, so they will include some insights into what we think. Obviously we never know, but what we think the new tax landscape will look like for businesses and individuals. I think that it's also in your chat. We will try and get back to you guys if you left your name or your email with some of your open questions. And feel free to reach out to us. As you can see, we love doing this. We love you. We just greatly entertain ourselves just chatting and planning. So, hopefully we'll do this again and you guys will join us again in the future. Andrew, anything else you want to add?
On my website, gradmantax.com, I've written over the years some articles on OZs, which I really think are, I've alluded to some of them, and they go into some of the stuff we discussed in greater depth. So if this is interest, you might want to look at that.
Definitely. Andrew's been fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. And we will see you again, maybe at least on the webinars for year-end tax planning, if not sooner. Bye-bye.
Thanks.